Hello, everybody, and welcome in from BaltimoreBaseball.com. I'm Steve Cockey, and the Orioles have an agreement with Mark Trumbo, a new 3-year deal to keep him in Baltimore. Here to break it all down for us, as he always does, is our senior writer, Dan Connolly. Dan, how are you?
Good, Stephen. Let's start with physical.
That's always a good way to start with the Orioles. We've got to cover that Olivia Newton-John time. Still pending physical. They have an agreement. Nothing is official until it's official. But Dan, we got to start, I think, with the terms here. 3 years, $37.5 million, a $12.5 million average annual value. How surprised are you that this particular contract was able to get Mark Trumbo to sign on the dotted line?
Very surprised. And I think the industry itself would be surprised. You know, I think when it started, I thought 4 years and $60 million would be about what it was going to take to get Mark Trumbo. That's kind of around the same salary that Nelson Cruz got as a free agent after the 2014 season. And I just think they're somewhat comparable. Obviously, Cruz had a much higher WAR that year, but if you look at it, you know, Cruz was also 3 or 4 years older. I was wrong, and the industry seemed wrong. I mean, what happened was the whole value of free agents, especially power free agents, really dipped this year. And, you know, a guy like Jose Bautista, he only gets a 1-year deal. A guy like Edwin Encarnacion, who reportedly turned down a 4-year, $80 million deal, ended up with a 3-year, $60 million deal. So, you know, the fact that Trumbo is under $40 million really is very surprising to me.
Dan, how much do you think the qualifying offer and having that draft pick attached to him, how much do you think that hurt Mark Trumbo's market?
I think it was huge, Steve. And I think it was also huge that this is the last year that the qualifying offer will be in what we see, because, you know, it's no longer going to be a first-round draft pick if you take one of these type free agents. And so I think a lot of teams just didn't want to give up a draft pick in 2017. And if you look at it, the two guys that were remaining with the QOs, you know, from basically mid-December on, were Jose Bautista and Mark Trumbo. And where did those two guys go? Back to the teams that had offered him the QO in the first place. So no one loses a draft pick with those two. And I think that was an absolutely huge thing that kept down his market.
Dan, in terms of the roster configuration now, again, pending physical, of course, but assuming that Mark Trumbo is in the fold for 2017 and beyond, how do you think this shakes out in terms of, does he DH almost every day? Does he platoon in right field with Seth Smith and DH maybe against righties, giving Trey Mancini a spot on the roster as a platoon DH? What do you think in terms of how this shakes out roster configuration-wise?
Well, I think in a perfect world, Mark Trumbo plays nearly every game, and most of those are designated hitter. I think the Orioles felt like they could do better defensively in right field than they did last year with Trumbo in there most of the time. I think the goal was to get a better defensive right fielder and really just improve the outfield defense overall. That would include someone who can really back up at center field if Adam Jones needs a spell. At this point right now, Seth Smith appears to be a little bit better of a right fielder than Mark Trumbo was last year, but I don't think it's significantly better. And so I still think that there might be a situation where they go out and they get another right fielder, another outfielder who can play right and maybe can spell center as well. You know, obviously Michael Bourne is a name that we're going to be thinking of because he was with the team last year. Angel Pagan is a guy who, you know, we've mentioned several times. So maybe they go ahead and do something like that. And that changes the whole roster. As it sits today, I think the scenario that you brought up is kind of what will happen. I think there will be, you know, that Trumbo will play a lot of DH and will kind of swap out in the outfield with the Seth Smith and Mancini may be on the roster. But I do believe that changes if they get a right fielder, and then that allows Trumbo to play a lot more at DH, which I think where the Orioles would like him to be for the most part. I mean, he can play first base, and I think one of the things we're going to see, Steve, is I think Mark Trumbo is going to be the Orioles' backup first baseman now. I think he'll spell Chris Davis more than he did last year. Last year, he started 4 games at first base. Trumbo did. I would anticipate we see more of that because, you know, scouts, people I talk to, all say that Trumbo is a pretty good first baseman. And I think, again, they want to improve that right field defense.
This 3-year deal, Dan, it takes the Orioles into 2019, which is a fairly significant year, depending on how you look at it, given that Dan Duquette, Buck Showalter, Machado, Jones, Britton, all these guys are under contract through 2018 only. This one, along with Chris Davis, stretches into 2019. Should we read anything into that at all in your mind?
I don't think so, or at least not yet. I think what we need to read into it is the Orioles are trying to be competitive in 2019. I think that's an important thing to tell fans, and that's an important thing to have to be considering. But I don't think that means this signing means anything as far as Manny Machado is concerned, or Zach Britton's concerned, or even Chris Tillman and J.J. Hardy, who can potentially be free agents at the end of 2017, what they're concerned. I think the point is that the Orioles felt like this was a way to get Trumbo. A 3-year deal is manageable. $37.5 million is manageable. That's not going to break the bank for anybody. So I think that what we were seeing here is a real good contract, a real good kind of agreement or mutual agreement between the two teams. But does that mean anything for 2019? I mean, it's good that they have another quality player there locked up, and he'll still be in his early 30s.
All right, Dan, to wrap this up, get your crystal ball out a little bit. Are the Orioles done at this point? Is this pretty much the team you think that we're going to see in 2017? Or do you think, you've mentioned a little bit about them potentially still looking for another outfielder? How feasible do you think that is in terms of a fairly significant piece? Starting pitcher, we've heard maybe they're still looking for somebody toward the back end of that rotation with the departure of Yovani Gallardo and the Smith deal. How many more moves? Do you think there's anything fairly significant left for the Orioles before the 2017 season?
Dan Duquette is a collector, Steve. He likes to collect. And this is a great collecting market, in my opinion. This is played perfectly into Dan Duquette's hands. He loves trying to get the guys who are values, financial values. And I believe that he's still going to be looking. And I believe that if there's a guy who he thinks is a financial value at starting pitcher, he's going to go after him. The same for a reliever, specifically a left-handed reliever. The same for an outfielder who can play right field and maybe even get on base and lead off. I don't think the shopping list is done for Dan Duquette. It never seems to be done for Dan Duquette, especially in a depressed market, and especially still heading into February. We're halfway through January now. This is where Dan Duquette makes his money, if you will. This is where he kind of builds, and we've seen so many guys join the team in February or in late January, and this is just another one. So to answer your question in a long way, I still think there's some roster moves to come, Steve. Maybe they're signed as minor league deals. There are going to be some decent players out there. There are probably 95 free agents still available in the market on January 19th. That is crazy, and that is not something that we've seen, and it keeps getting thicker and thicker, the market does, year after year after year now. I mean, last year we were talking about the glut, and the glut was probably 60, and now it's 90. So Dan Duquette's going to play that, and he's going to start running out of roster spots at some point. But right now, I think he's focused on getting the best deals, and I mean that's what has made him successful for the Baltimore Orioles.
A couple weeks from spring training, but we know there's still more to come, as you mentioned, with Dan Duquette at the helm. For Dan Connolly, I'm Steve Cockey for BaltimoreBaseball.com. Until next time, so long.